This week we're talking about the different paradigms. We're going to talk about the differences between the social scientific and the interpretive paradigms. Well, when we talk about the social scientific paradigm, what are we talking about? What we're really looking at is the scientific method. We are talking about how to apply this to human behavior. So just like a biologist or a chemist or a physicist, we start with some observation or question we might have. We might do some research in the area, develop some sort of question or a hypothesis. We will test that, analyze the data that we gathered, we will report the conclusions, and that will lead to an entirely different set of observations. And we can question it all over again, and we continue with this cyclical pattern till we can refine our conclusions, or we might find that an observation or a conclusion was reached that was incorrect or invalid. So the scientific process continues to evolve in our understanding of the world. So what are we talking about when we do this in the social scientific paradigm, when we talk about people's behavior, which can be erratic, unpredictable? What we're talking about is just using an organized method and conducting research with empirical observations. And what that means is things that we can count, we can gather, we can see, we can feel, we can touch. I can't calculate how many hopes and dreams you have unless I have you write them out. If I want to know how much of an emotion you're feeling, I can measure that. I can measure your biophysical response. These are observations that we can make using our logic to test our theories and to describe and predict human activity. What do our theories really tend to do? This is a long list. These are just the kinds of things we would like our theories to do. I would not ask you to reproduce this list in any way, but we want theories. Good theories should organize and summarize knowledge. We should take a whole bunch of stuff and be able to synthesize it down to a couple of phrases. That's what a good theory should do. And what it does is it focuses on relationships between different variables or different phenomena that occur in the world. These things interact. What is the nature of that interaction? Help explain how the pieces interact with one another. So that allows us to clarify the world around us. We could then predict human behavior. If we see a pattern that is persistent over time, we can be pretty confident we're going to see the same thing again in the future. And if that does happen, that allows us to generate more questions about how and why and under what conditions that might occur. Sometimes we can take a very fine-grained question and we can get more abstract. We can get bigger picture and talk about what are the social structures that are at place that create this particular behavior. We can help explain how people see the world, but at the end of the day, what we want to see is that some theories might have a generative function in that they create new ideas, new understanding, new possibilities, new questions. So here's an example, just to kind of bring all of that home, because that was a lot of stuff. The health belief model looks like this. Essentially, we are trying to explain how people make decisions about their health. Now, that is a complicated question. There's financial, medical, insurance questions, literacy questions, self-confidence and efficacy beliefs, what contributes to what kind of information you know. There's a lot of things going on. And so the health belief model is an attempt to sort of summarize all of that. So in essence, you have individual variables, age, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomics, knowledge, that contributes to people's individual beliefs, such as the susceptibility to a disease, the perceived benefits of a behavior, what are the barriers, and efficacy is about whether or not I believe I can do something. That leads to whether I see there is a threat and I should act upon it, and that describes my behavior, which in turn would influence my belief about benefits and efficacy and so on, right? And so this is a broad picture about how people make health decisions. And that's what good theories and models should do, is it summarizes a very complex question into a testable model that we can go out and see if this works. So what are we doing? We are creating in the social scientific paradigm predictions, and our predictions are hypotheses. And these are educated guesses or predictions about the relationship between variables. It may be based on evidence that we have seen. We might see this observation multiple times, and we want to see if we can reproduce it. So testing hypotheses really is about objectivity, empiricism, and control. And empiricism is that what we can observe and see. I can only measure what can be measured. I can't just make it up. And when I am doing a social scientific study, I am objective. I don't have my emotions and my feelings inserted into the study. If I am right or wrong on my hypothesis, it doesn't matter. I am not caught up in it. I just want to know if I am right or wrong. And one of the things that we do is we try to create some personal control. In other words, our personal biases do not influence the study. We're not trying to make a particular outcome come true. Now, one of the things that's important to distinguish social scientific paradigm from the others is our understanding of what constitutes reality. So for the social scientific paradigm, reality is with a capital R. There is one. It can be observed, identified, and explained. We are all existing in the same space, in the same world, in the same reality. It is a shared understanding, and it is stable. It doesn't change, and so that allows me to make predictions. The world is generally going to be the same tomorrow as it was today. So because of that, we can generate theories. And theories are descriptive, predictive, or causal statements about how the world works. This is what happened the past 3,476 days. I'm pretty confident it's going to happen tomorrow as well. And so it outlines the situations under which this applies, or other words we talk about as the conditions under which this applies. So a good way to think about this is like a recipe. If I take a recipe and I follow the instructions, I should get the same result. And if I didn't get the result, I can look back and see what did I do differently or what did I forget to include. If I'm baking a cake, I can take all of the ingredients and mix them and put it in the oven for the predetermined amount of time, and I take it out and I've still got liquid batter. Well, did I turn the oven on? Right? That was a step that needed to happen. So it often includes these statements, these axioms, postulates, theorems. We use these different terms sort of interchangeably. These are just the statements about how the world works. Now, good theory should apply across cultures, although some theories are culturally bound. So what makes a good or a bad claim for a social scientist? That is something that can be replicated. Can I find the same result again? Can I produce the same result? A good recipe or a good theory should produce the same outcome. I made a cake, it turned out like this. I did the same thing, and then I made a loaf of bread. Well, there's something about the recipe that is not really helpful here. And so I should be able to compare it to previous results. Did it taste the same? Did it look the same? Did it feel the same? Did it sound the same? If I did this thing over and over again, am I going to get the same results? If I produce the same message, am I going to get the same consequences? And so there is a theorist, Karl Popper, who said that claims cannot be proven, but only refuted. And what that means is that when we are trying to refine our understanding, we just look for the times under which our theory doesn't work. And that helps us provide the boundary for when something works and when something doesn't work. The final thing I'll say generally about the social scientific paradigm is that it should be value-free. Our values and morals should not influence our research. We are not looking for a conclusion to support our personal beliefs. Value-free research is the ideal. We are humans, so sometimes it doesn't always work that way. Now, if we think about the interpretive paradigm, on the other hand, it is almost a 180 switch from the social scientific paradigm. So the interpretive paradigm says that our subjective perceptions of understanding reality is where we should be putting our focus and our energy. So the scientific paradigm says that there is an objective, there is one way of doing things. The interpretive paradigm says that there's lots of ways that people understand the world, and all of them are valid, and we should look at them. And so there are differences here when we talk about rationalism versus empiricism and subjectivity versus objectivity. And when we are looking for subjectivity in the interpretive paradigm, what we are attempting to accomplish is there is maybe a world out there, but it is not the same for everyone, right? If I was raised in the United States, my understanding of the world is going to be different from someone who was raised in Bangladesh. It's going to be different from someone who was raised in Chile. It's going to be different from someone who was raised in Japan. It's going to be different from someone who was raised in Australia, right? We can think about we have different cultural understandings of the world and the way our society functions. But that's not terribly different from how you were raised in your household versus your neighbor's household. Your parents create a certain version of the world for you, and it's going to be different from your neighbor's parents. And those differences are worth understanding and sharing and celebrating. So the development of the paradigm was sort of a response to the social scientific paradigm. So in other words, the social scientific approach doesn't care about thoughts and feelings. And this is kind of a saying, but we have those, and they do kind of matter. And so it doesn't always work for all of our human behavior. So I'm going to briefly highlight 3 broad approaches that are used. The first is hermeneutics, in which we are simply examining texts or interpreting a text. It started with examining holy books. And what we are trying to do is find something about the author, the context, or some shared experience between the author and the reader to try to understand what's going on. You can't separate the observer from what is observed. We have to explore the world as a social activity. And so for hermeneutics, subjectivity is paramount. Your individual experience is what we are interested in doing. Lots of stuff can count as a text. It's not just some words on a page. It can be a picture, it can be a movie, it can be a video, it can be a series of actions that are performed in public. So it really is much more broad than it used to be. And so you are really looking at how did individuals understand the thing that happened. So an example of this. Here you have a poster from a campaign called the Unfair Campaign. And if you look at some of the text that it says on the image, it says things like, "We're lucky we're white, lucky to be the majority, lucky that people see us, not a color. We're lucky car doors don't get locked when we walk by." And as you start reading this, you're like, what is this a campaign for? But as you go further down, and it says, if you're not sure what to say, visit unfaircampaign.org. If you see racism, speak up, break the silence. And a little unclear as to what they're really trying to accomplish. But as it turns out, this was actually a campaign launched in Duluth, Minnesota, which is 98% white, to tackle white privilege. But as you read the text of someone who doesn't know that, you can't possibly understand that's what this is about. This feels like, oh, that's a white supremacist lady, and I don't like her now. That's really what you get from the campaign. So the observer, you, and the observed, this image, can't be separated. Even though I have told you what this campaign is supposed to be about, you read it again, and your interpretation and perception of it may not change. And so that is something that we would do in terms of hermeneutics. Phenomenology is about how we understand experiences. It started with some of these taken for granted experiences, so things that we don't often talk about. And it was kind of getting at why do we interact the way that we do? And so we would reach for this epoch, this setting aside taken for granted assumptions, trying to explain something. So what we would often do in phenomenology is we would engage in a phenomenological reduction. So what that means is we might ask people in a group to write down their understanding of some experience or some object. And as they do that, their understanding of that is going to only include so much information. And so we want to boil down the experience to a commonality. So for instance, if I asked you to explain what a dog is, we will gather all of the information, and we're going to see that people include things that are mostly the same, but a couple of things that are different. And we might want to know, why did you include those things? But the other things we want to attempt to accomplish is, what are you leaving out? So assume I don't know what a dog is. You can't just say, a dog, but I don't know what that is. And so how do you explain that to someone? So this is something that we do with our kids when it's a food that they don't like. We engage in something called Alien Explorer. So we all take a bite of the same food, and we have to describe it in a way that would make sense to someone who's never experienced that food item before. And it's pretty hard to do. It's squishy, it's has some bite to it, it's very wet, right? Those are the kinds of things we'd use to describe something. But if I was saying, how did you like your broccoli? Oh, it was broccoli. Well, what does that mean, right? That's what phenomenology gets about. What are those taken for granted things that we don't often discuss? And the last is symbolic interaction, which really just says that there's a relationship between people and the world. And meaning is developed based on those interactions. So this came out of the Chicago School, and it had kind of basic ideas that there's an interaction between the human mind, our social interaction, and that's what helps us understand society. It is constantly evolving. Objects don't have meaning in and of themselves. They only have meaning based on our interactions with them and our experiences. So your experiences may be different than my experiences. That doesn't mean that one is right or one is wrong. They are different, and we should talk about what those differences are. There will be lots of different approaches that we will talk about: ethnography, interviewing, focus group, and content analysis that are used in the interpretive paradigm, so we'll get into more of those specifics later. There is a lot of large questions that you can ask from an interpretive paradigm. Again, not asking you to know all of these things, but you can see how it's different, right? How is this different from the natural sciences? What's the purpose of the research? What is reality? What is human nature? Do we have free will? What are good claims? How do we assess roles in values? And here our values come to play, right? I'm studying this because it matters to me. And people talk about things that matter to them. The fact that you're talking about it gives it meaning, and that's something that the interpretive paradigm will value.